Today on the news and why it matters, the shootings over the weekend and some things that you will not hear about them in the mainstream media. We've got a lot to get into, and it starts right now. Welcome to the news and why it matters. I am Sarah Gonzalez, joined by Stu Bergier, Jason Buttrell, and Aaron Colin, all in agreement, I think, that the coverage of the shootings that happened in El Paso and in Ohio over the weekend is pretty much the top story of the day. It's what everyone's talking about. Stu, I'll let you get into it first.
So much to get into.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously a horrible weekend for so many different reasons. I think people kind of go back to their own sort of like little corners and start defending the territory they're comfortable defending in moments like this, which isn't always the healthiest thing to do as far as the actual debate and the future of the country go. I was fascinated, though, at the way the left and the media ran to the very predictable corner of saying this was Donald Trump's fault. This guy was obviously a racist. You read his manifesto, you realize right away that he's a racist. And, when I first heard the news break, I heard the clips from the media. It's kind of what I thought, too. It's like, okay, well, you can't blame Trump for this, but, the fact that a racist did this is really bad, and we know what's coming. We've been in conservative media long enough to know, right, it's right around the corner, which is they're going to start saying conservatives are responsible, talk radio is responsible, conservative Twitter is responsible, and then now Donald Trump is responsible. But, I decided to do something that I guess, like a lot of people in the media didn't bother to do, which was read the actual thing. I mean, and this is a weird place for us here at The Blaze because we have a policy, I think it's the right policy, which is to make sure that we do not glorify these shooters. We do not draw attention to their work and reasoning. Typically, we never give their names. We have a pretty extensive policy on the news side on that one, and it's one I agree with and actually fought for and argued for behind the scenes because I think it's one of those things where a lot of people die, right? Like, 40 people, or I think it's 20 people a day or so die from handguns. We never hear about any of those people. But these big, spectacle sort of incidents are the things that drive the media coverage and I think drive the copycats and follow-ups. And people, this whole gamification of this process comes to these guys comparing, notes. And so I don't want to give it any more credit and any more attention than it deserves. This one I thought was worth a minor exception just on the basis of the way the media was covering it. Because they are covering it, and they are giving lots of quotes from the manifesto, but every quote they are giving from the manifesto has to go back to this sort of white supremacy ideology, the fact that he didn't like illegal immigrants, the fact that he was a really bad racist that didn't like Mexicans. All these things are true. And that, I think, explains why El Paso, right? The guy's in Allen, Texas. It's about a 8 to 10 hour drive to get down there. Why go all the way to El Paso? He wanted to be close to the border. There's another element of that, though, and I want to focus on that. Because this sentence was used in every news story that I saw about the manifesto. It said this: if we can get rid of enough people, then our way of life can become more sustainable. And you read that in the sort of context of a white supremacy article, you can kind of feel what that, what we're trying to say there, right? Like this guy is some, racist white guy, and he sees these invasion forces coming in, and they're going to turn the country into a Hispanic land. I mean, Sarah, I know you're step one in this process. They're going to turn it into some crazy Hispanic land that's going to, violate the rights of the white person to flourish. This nonsensical Richard Spencer bullcrap. So it made sense in that context. However, the actual paragraph that is ripped from, it's the last sentence of a paragraph. And let's go through some of this, because if you can tell me the difference between Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Jay Inslee and, Cory Booker and this guy, you're more of a man than I am, because I don't see it. This is what it says. It's a little long, but bear with me because I think the context is the whole story here. The American lifestyle affords our citizens an incredible quality of life. However, our lifestyle is destroying the environment of our country. The decimation of the environment is creating a massive burden for future generations. Corporations are heading the destruction of our environment by shamelessly over-harvesting resources. This has been a problem for decades. For example, this phenomenon is brilliantly portrayed in the decades-old classic The Lorax, what a bizarre reference. Watersheds around the country, especially in agricultural areas, are being depleted. Fresh water is being polluted from farming and oil drilling operations. Consumer culture is creating thousands of tons of unnecessary plastic waste and electronic waste. Remember that phrase for a minute. And recycling to help slow this down is almost non-existent. Urban sprawl creates inefficient cities, blah, blah, blah.
Wait a minute. Now, Donald Trump, the developer,
yes,
who builds buildings, he's very concerned about urban sprawl.
The guy with the gold hotels.
Now I'm seeing the connection.
Oh, now you see it, yeah. God knows how many trees of paper towels we use to wipe our water off our hands. I mean, again, like blah, blah, blah. I think it ends coming up here. I mean, he talks about how most people are not happy about changing their lifestyle, and says the next logical step is to decrease the number of people in America using resources. This is where the media jumps in and starts the quote. If we can get rid of enough people, then our way of life can be more sustainable. I mean, I've never seen anything like it.
Everything before that last sentence sounds like it could have been in the Democratic debate from one of the candidates.
Or the Green New Deal.
Or the Green New Deal, right? Like, I mean, he's basically quoting left-wing environmentalist propaganda. They lift one sentence out of there, and then they go back and say, okay, well, you know what? Everything's fine. Just forget what the context is. It's amazing to me.
In the context before that, I mean, even before that paragraph, he's talking about basically Medicare for all. You know, he's worried about
universal basic income,
UBI. There was the student loan debt. All this stuff. All of these left-wing progressive talking points. He's just spitting them all out.
I mean, he's basically in that debate, right? He's Bill de Blasio, basically.
Basically, it's the prototypical Richard Spencer type person, the person that they try to say is part of the right, or is conservative. No, there is nothing conservative about that. Alt-right means the alternative to the right.
Yes,
I mean they're not conservatives. They're socialists by nature. They're collectivists by nature. This is an identitarian, which really is no different from the identitarianism that we see coming from the hardcore progressives, the hardcore feminists.
And the right. I mean, you know, you go on TV and you see. We were talking about this in the previous half hour, where you know you have this idea that you could go on TV and say, you know what, look, there's just no way the Democrats can nominate a white man to this role. Like that is like straight out racism, right? Like that's not. I mean, you might not think it's racism, but it is. I mean, it is when you're saying a group of people cannot hold positions of power because of the color of their skin. I mean, how could you be more clear? And I think one other thing that popped in my head as we were talking about this a lot, and we went back and forth with this off the air a little bit, Jason, which I think is something I didn't notice initially. I think the selection of El Paso was intentional. It's right by the border. He wanted to kill immigrants, Mexicans, people who are crossing the border, Mexican Americans. The area is about 80% Hispanic. But I think one thing I missed initially was that I think the selection of Walmart was also an intentional choice. He's talking about plastic waste, electronic waste, consumerism,
greedy corporations
ruining the environment. I mean, that is the left-wing case against Walmart. It is the case that the Sierra Club would write up about Walmart on any given fundraising effort. And he quotes it and then goes to a Walmart to kill the consumers who are doing all of this. I don't think Walmart was a mistake here. I think Walmart was an intentional target along with this border town. And the media is literally telling you half of the story and stopping. And I even think it's worse than that, because it's not just that they're ignoring the left-wing side of this. They're taking sentences from the paragraphs where it's being discussed, removing the context and making it seem like he was talking about something else. That's unconscionable. I cannot believe they did it.
I don't think I've heard anything more egregious.
It becomes the danger of, and we don't want to make celebrities out of these people and publish their manifestos, but it becomes the danger when other people are doing it and they take it out of context like that. It becomes hard because you say, well, we want the whole story to be out there. We want it to be accurate. And it becomes tough. And it's some sort of a moral conundrum of, do we publish it so it's accurate so people are not misrepresenting it, or do we not publish it and allow a media organization to totally misrepresent the whole thing?
And that's almost another conversation on what happens now. So so I understand people not publishing, like media organizations not running stuff like that and glorifying him. But I went and looked for his manifesto. I had an incredibly hard time finding it.
I did too.
It's because they took the internet provider that was hosting the 8chan took it down. So now like I think the entire 8chan is down now.
They pulled funding for it, right? The company said, we're not going to fund this particular website anymore because it's used for these things.
I mean, I think we're going down some very, very shaky ground here, because now, I mean, there's already that, who is it, Stu, that's trying to, it's going through Congress right now, or the Senate, where they're trying to figure out how to regulate the internet.
Out of Missouri, is it Holly out of Missouri?
Holly,
yeah.
that's right, that's right. Some of the things in that are crazy. Like regulating the amount of time you can spend on certain websites and all that. We're going down those lines. Then we had the president today talking about red flag laws, which, whoa, full stop. I mean, like, we have to seriously look at some of this stuff, because if you just go off and do something, that's, based off of an emotion, we're in some serious trouble here. I mean, liberty is not easy. We just put that out there right now. Freedom is not easy. There are some things that we're going to have to deal with. But if we jump off the road here, and we start going towards, putting in some of these like laws that infringe upon the Second Amendment or laws that infringe upon the First Amendment, we're screwed.
Mm-hmm. Aaron, what do you make of the difference in coverage between this shooting that happened in El Paso and then the one that happened in Ohio? Because I feel like it's much different.
It's much different. I mean, you can see that it's so much more balanced toward the El Paso because it fits a narrative. And when you look at
it doesn't even fit that narrative.
Right.
When you actually look at it, they're actually
they can force it into it, but it's much harder with the Dayton situation, where you look at the person who committed that crime and some of the things that he believed, his political views, and that would force them to look at the other side of this and say, well, maybe it's not, if we're going to blame rhetoric, if we're going to blame politics for these crimes, well, we would have to do that on both sides, but they don't want to do that. And so you can see how much the coverage is slanted toward the one tragedy. Both are equally tragic, but toward the one that fits a narrative that they want to push.
And I think too, like, you look at those two crimes, and the El Paso one, I think, was clearly ideological in as far as motive goes. We know that from the manifesto, and it's both left-wing and right-wing. I mean, I completely reject the idea that racism is a right-wing ideology. It's not. It's white nationalism has nothing to do with the right wing whatsoever. But I mean, given the media narratives, I'll allow it for that moment. The one in Dayton was done by a socialist, but there's not a clear indication it was politically motivated. Like, I don't think it would be under the idea of terrorism per se. It does not seem to have that. He killed his sister. It seems like there could have been a personal motive. But we don't know for sure yet, unless that's changed very recently.
No, it hasn't, but I'm very worried if it is. Even if it's not, because of the timing of this. 13 hours after that, there was a guy that posted a manifesto over in Washington who firebombed an ICE facility. The media did the same thing they're doing at Dayton. Actually, you didn't hardly hear anything about it. You have to search for that news. The Blaze covered it, but not a lot of people did. They actually called Antifa, or have this guy as a martyr right now, where the guy said, take up arms, now is the time, because no one else is doing anything. You had Antifa saying they're going to go down to the border, I think next month, was it September 1st, to start something, and they were posting pictures of ICE agents being shot. There is I don't want to say civil war brewing in the country, not like the 1800s, but there are groups that are looking to fight each other, and they're looking to take action. People like this idiot, this guy in El Paso, people like the guy over in Washington, and then even if this guy wasn't in Dayton wasn't going off an ideological, there will be people that think that he did, and there'll be people that will be cheering him on. That's escalating. That's getting worse and worse and worse. It's troublesome.
All right, before we take a break, I want to thank our sponsor, realestateagentsitrust.com. If you are looking to buy or sell your house, no pressure. It's just like, it's worth a lot of money and probably the biggest investment you're ever going to make in your life. And you probably shouldn't leave it to Jason's plumber, who works on his toilet and also happens to have his real estate license. That's kind of weird.
It happens.
I think maybe you go to, it's like not in the same class, I hope.
I don't know nowadays. Maybe there is a class.
Toilet school and plumber school and also real estate school. I don't know. But so lucky for you, Glenn formed a company. These guys are in radio. They move around all the time. Formed this company who they vet all of these real estate agents all across the country. They vet them to make sure that they are doing this full time. They are the experts in the area. And they are going to get you the best value for your home. And also, they're listeners, right? So they share our values.
Yeah, and my big line with this is, when you're signing your documents, if the real estate agent brings crayons, don't go with them.
Crayons.
Anytime crayons are involved in a real estate document signing, run the other direction.
That's a really solid.
I've been able to talk Glenn into putting that into the standards for realestateagentsitrust.com. So that's guaranteed. They will not bring crayons.
That's your sell right there. They've got them, like I said, all across the country. So wherever you're moving, wherever you're located, they have one where you are. You got to go to realestateagentsitrust.com. Back in a minute.
How about matte pencils?
I think that's okay. Magic markers.
Step up.
Probably okay.
Getting back into the conversation dissecting this weekend's events, it was really interesting to see how the media and how our lawmakers responded to the shootings that took place in El Paso and in Dayton. Want to bring to the table first our good friend of the show, Robert Francis, and who he believes is responsible for the shooting in El Paso. Watch.
Do you think President Trump is a white nationalist?
Yes, I do. And again, from some of the record that I just recited to you, the things that he has said, both as a candidate and then as the President of the United States, this cannot be open for debate. And you, as well as I, have a responsibility to call that out, to make sure that the American people understand what is being done in their name by the person who holds the highest position of public trust in this land.
It's not open for debate?
Can't even discuss it anymore.
Well, we better not talk about it then.
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Beto, for explaining this to us. Maybe it's not open for debate for him because there's actually no evidence that he could give to us.
Right. I mean,
no clear-cut evidence to prove that Trump is that.
What is their legitimate best piece of evidence that he is a white nationalist? It's probably Charlottesville, right, where he says there are good people on both sides. Now, look, we all know what he meant by that. It was a really bad political mistake, right?
If you put it in context, you know what he meant by that.
Yes, and what he meant by it was, we all know there were people who were upset about the statues coming down that are not racist, that were not saying Jews will not replace us, that were not carrying torches like morons through parks, right? Like there are a lot of people who are like, look, this is our history, and as bad as it is, I don't think we should be tearing down statues. That side of the debate was not present at that rally, but was talking about that issue. And he, the English language is not always his friend. And he did not say that very well at all. But I mean, I think everyone kind of understands that's what he was going for. He certainly was not in public going for, KKK members are good people. Right. Like even if he actually believed it, he wouldn't have said it on national television.
Cory Booker used that exact example to say how he is a white nationalist today. And what's crazy is they're just saying it as if it's fact.
It's a reach.
Yeah, and let's get into that. But we do have a clip of Cory Booker. Let's watch that.
We have a president of the United States who is particularly responsible. I, in my faith, have this idea that you reap what you sow, and he is sowing seeds of hatred in our country, and this harvest of hate violence that we're seeing right now lies at his feet. When you have the president from the highest moral office in our land talking about invasions and infestations and whole countries, the kind of things that come out of his mouth that so harm the moral fabric of our nation, he is responsible. He's responsible when he has taken no action whatsoever to even condemn white supremacy.
Oh, okay. Well, we can get into that. But I would also like to bring up that President Trump this morning did condemn white supremacy. This is what we were hearing, right? Yeah. On Saturday, we were hearing, how dare President Trump, he has to come out and condemn white supremacy, otherwise the blood is on his hands. Now he falls right into their trap. And of course, what you hear is, well, it wasn't good enough.
He didn't change the law. He didn't say he was going to change the law. He didn't, say he was going to ban guns. They just moved the goalpost on it once he does the thing that they were hitting him on before.
Of course, right? We all knew that was going to happen, and he knew it was going to happen. And this is why he doesn't like to do it.
Right.
Because he knows the second he goes and says, look, of course I hate white nationalists. What the hell are you talking about? He doesn't even know what they are. Like, this is not his life. He's not a political animal. He's a guy who likes to fight. And I think a lot of times he gets himself in trouble because he thinks to himself, look, they know what I'm saying. Everybody knows I'm not a white nationalist. And everybody does know he's not a white nationalist. All these candidates on TV know he's not a white nationalist. He doesn't have an ideology that's even well developed enough to be a white nationalist. Richard Spencer puts a lot of thought into his racism. Donald Trump is just, he's flippant with words sometimes, and he does I've been critical of him, and I think he deserves criticism sometimes. You can go back into the 80s and stuff and find some pretty nasty stuff. But I mean, the bottom line is the stuff they're trying to throw out there, it's almost different than saying he's a racist. Racism is something you can kind of make a weird line on and say, well, I think someone who doesn't like affirmative action is racist. Or, I mean, you can come up with all sorts of things. You can define racism in a million different ways. White nationalist is an ideology. It's really specific.
And something that we should condemn wholeheartedly.
Wholeheartedly.
We should come out very strong, and you mentioned this in the show just now, Stu, that, in the other show, that we should be going after it with the same, conviction that we do Islamic extremism. Exactly the same. They're both terrorists. They're both awful human beings. But the thing that's so irritating, and the thing about with Charlottesville, to go back to that for a second, is that none of them would condemn the radical leftists that were there. They would not do it.
Well,
they kept
Antifa
just
still
screaming.
has not been condemned for what they did, like you said earlier, to the ICE facility.
The former vice chair of the DNC posts pictures of their pamphlets and tweets it out very proudly. They're at the highest echelons. They will not condemn them. They refuse to do it. But then they don't get hit on it. Except the left instead just comes right after, why won't you condemn white nationalism? We are!
I mean, right. It's like, Aaron, I want your input on this as well, but it's like, yeah, we all agree that murder is wrong, right? Like, we all agree that all of these things we have very hard lines on are wrong. We shouldn't have to just repeat ourselves. Shouldn't that just be an understanding in society that we all agree that white nationalism is wrong? We all agree that murder is wrong. We all agree all these things are wrong.
And the problem that comes is, we've seen this with these Democratic candidates. When one person says something, they set the bar. Everybody else is kind of forced to just follow along, whether they really believe it or not. So if Beto says, okay, you're a white nationalist, then Bernie will say it, then Booker will say it, then Harris will say it, and everybody's just following along. And then that becomes the narrative that's said. And then it comes to, Republicans, conservatives, and say, why don't you defend this? Why are you supporting this white nationalism? And it's like, we didn't. You just made something up and then threw it at us to say, you've got to defend it now. It doesn't make any sense.
Literally no one on the right has not come out, like a prominent person, and said, this is awful, this is something we condemn. There's been nobody on the right that I've seen. No one has been complacent on this at all.
It's interesting. I was trying to craft something that I wanted to say yesterday on the shootings, and my husband said, I said, does this sound okay to you? Because I'm trying very hard to, I don't want to say anything that sounds insensitive. And he said, well, you probably want to condemn white supremacy. I said, I don't have to. Why should I
why
have
are we
to?
forced to bring that into the conversation?
Well,
about
I've never said anything supporting white supremacy. Why should I have to be the one to say, yes, I condemn white supremacy too? It's like we're falling into this false narrative. We're just walking right into it and letting them put us on the defensive.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, I'm not going to condemn that. If someone wants to ask me flat out, I'm happy to tell them, but I'm not going to walk into their narrative that I should have to.
Right. I do see value in calling it out, being very vocal about it. I remember there was a video of Ilhan Omar where she refused to answer a question on female mutilation.
Yeah.
She refused to do it.
Well,
and
that's what I'm
instead
saying.
she
If
turned
someone
it
asks
around.
me,
and it was a member from her own
if they ask me, I'll
side.
answer the question.
Right.
I'm not going to operate under the assumption that everyone should just assume that I'm a white nationalist.
Right.
That
A
would be
little bit
very
of a
strange.
difference.
But it's like now I would love for somebody on the left to say, hey, can you condemn Antifa or can you not?
Right.
And they won't.
Well, yeah, they have done that, and there has been silence. I know you got something to say. Let's take a quick break. We'll be back. Stu made a very interesting point off air.
I'm very concerned that you denounced white supremacism.
I did.
Jason did. I did. Aaron did not.
I want to make an apology to the nation. I don't know if there's anything unclear. I am not a black white nationalist. I do condemn white nationalism in all forms, in case anybody was confused
Too
about
late!
Yeah,
You waited not far enough.
Way too long. All right, we've already got our minds made
Am
up.
I canceled now? Is that what
Yes.
Aaron Cullen is
Get out!
canceled.
it's over? We'll see you guys later then.